Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. The title is The Pen in the Hand of a Conscious Universe. To start off, the first thing I need to say is that just like the purpose of objective reality is its movement and evolution of position, similarly, the purpose of subjective reality, rather than moving, has to do with internalization and externalization. So it has to do with externalization. So in this episode, guys, I'm going to talk less as a mystic and more as a writer to you. Even though many things I've worked on have not met the light of day yet, but I feel I've experienced enough of a sort of writing state of mind. That means I have a very unique relationship with writing. Before I start, I got to tell you a story I've written, which really paints the picture well that I'm trying to communicate here. You see, there's a script I've written. It's called The Immortal Philosopher. And it's about the first philosopher in history who is alive at a time where technology is built like the movie Elysium. There's technology that heals the body. So in some sense, human beings and philosophers, this guy is the first philosopher in history who has become immortal through technology. So in the story I've written, this philosopher has to stay alive and see the consequences of his philosophical intervention with with the universal movement, with the planetary movement. And still, the whole story is a work in progress. But the whole idea is that there will come a time where our bodies may stick around, and the mind has to confront more of an eternal position of itself, especially in the future if consciousness somehow can get transferred into a technological body, which it's highly unlikely in our lifetime. But the idea is that we have eyes. These eyes see stuff. The stuff we see shifts and evolves behind our eyes, and then we can communicate it again. Really, nothing great really occurs unless the unknown is acknowledged and exhibitions of exploration are begun on a collective level. Our species has in some sense dared to go beyond the clouds of our atmosphere and to attempt to make ourselves an interstellar civilization. However, we have not dared to go beyond the clouds behind our eyes, or at least for some time. You see, there was something that I think Carl Jung was afraid. And many philosophers are afraid of this. And what it is the fear of the most important questions in the moment being forgotten. When it comes to writing, you have to understand that it's an art form. Writing is an art form. And so, just like in martial arts, the person practices like a kick 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and eventually the dude can kick anywhere, any moment. With writing, if a person attempts writing a sentence every day, an inspired sentence, you see, there's sentences you can write where you're just writing to fill the space, and there's sentences you write where it's as if you feel you don't have enough room to even say what you have to say, so you're saying the most important things that are. It's like how yeah, it eventually it becomes trying to communicate the inner realm into the outer realm as I'm doing. At first there's structure, but as the person becomes acquainted with the structure, this is something they don't say in martial arts classes, but they should, is that the whole point of the idea is that you are learning another style to incorporate it in your own style. What is the idea of MMA, mixed martial arts? It's mixed. That means the person knows various ways of expression. Me personally, before I gave these talks in 2014, starting from at the end of 2011 to 13, I went through some sort of unique transformation of character. This transformation of character, I don't know how to say it. It was like it was pretty much like me living a life and then midway through that life realizing it wasn't my life, then wondering what was my life, only to realize that it has to arise from a sort of independent position within. You see, that's when life becomes interesting, when you find the question that only your eyes can see. That means only you can respond to, only you can find the meaning of. You see, stuff that's external to everybody, for example, if we all wanted to talk about the origins of mountains and how they in some sense surface over time, we can. But if we want to speak about inner emotional kind of psychological positions of character and self, then that becomes more of a personal thing. This is something I say often, is that you have to realize at some point no other human being on this planet has your eyes. No other human being on this planet has your eyes. What that means is every person is a pilot of their own attention. Now, if they don't pay attention to their attention, humorously, life is going to pilot them anyways. It's some sense kind of realizing that first we're being piloted by the laws of nature, the laws of you can even say through a scientific analysis of the laws of nature, but then in while we're under the influence of the laws of nature, man can in some sense project the laws of his own mind. You see, the difference is that a part of nature can now see itself to do something about it. Back in the day, it couldn't. When we go truly far back in history and in the evolution of man, I find something strange, guys. I find like the same way the caveman discovered fire, we as a species discovered language, but instead of language, instead of just observing the language, we decided to live in the language. This is why everybody nowadays has a name. Everybody has a sort of personhood. People are writing biographies. Because it's the fact that it's a crystallization of our separateness from our world. You can say the free will is the ultimate crystallization of the separation of intelligence from itself, the intelligence of nature. The pen is in the hand of a conscious being who has a sort of conscious access to the universe. I find that Humanity 2.0 must emerge. Humanity 2.0 is the first time where the awareness of the free will, which is in common to most human beings, in some sense, the awareness of the free will becomes the common denominator. What that means is our physical bodies are different, our beliefs upon the world are different. And in some sense, the only thing we have in common is an awareness to existence and emptiness. You see, I realize in order to bring a sort of allegiance between the inner realities of people, there must emerge a story that requires effort. I realized something early on, guys, that the mind needs to, just like we take our bodies to the gym to exercise, the mind's exercise is self-transformation. And self transformation automatically happens when something is observed to be important in the sense of its novelty factor. So at some point, I was believing in many past ideologies in my youth, only to wonder then where is the now? Where is the new? Novelty. Novelty is the secret of advancement. That there must be in any civilization, any system of governments, a freedom for the new to enter. Do you know what that means? That means if the governance of our whole world is a bunch of old people sitting in a room, the young kids of the future generation are just running in. And it's like, I remember seeing this as a kid, you know, where it's like a bunch of old people sitting in a room and a little young kid comes and totally is ignorant to all the rules, and people fall in love with that human being who's bringing something new to the moment. I have personal experience with this, guys. You know, I was told that me and my brother, when we were really young, really, really young, whenever my parents would take us to a gathering, we would just go in and start running everywhere in the house. Do you know? And it would in some sense evoke a new attitude. The whole point of enlightenment is not for us to stamp the same shape in every generation of civilization. The whole point of enlightenment, at least I find, was that it was a study of the sensory realm. It was a suggestion of how the light in your eyes is being your existence now, and there is an intelligent experiencer alive. And so now this experiencer has to work with its external reality and internal reality. And we have dwelled in the external reality, ideologically worshipping for many eons. Ever since idol worship, guess what man worshipped after? Objects, subjects. We started worshipping language. Language became us. We went inside language to a point where it's as if Iron Man didn't step out of the Iron Man suit so long that it thinks Tony Stark thinks the Iron Man suit is his skin. And that is the fallacy. The skin of our minds is, even though it appears to be language, but we are creatures beyond language, because there were moments of profound silence where many dimensions are multidimensionally present. Only in their vocalization there comes a special individualization that brings forth a certain concept in a certain context. So we have to realize now the pen is in the hand of consciousness, and consciousness appears as a factor, as a sort of known and unknown factor. It's as if our human existence is an equation and there's an X variable, there's an unknown variable in it. Now that unknown variable, guess what? The yogis, the mystics, the poets, the philosophers, they called it soul or the unknown. Do you see? So that unknown factor, this is what I realized. The word soul has no image. The fact that people think the word soul is like a ghost in a body moving from different stuff, you know, different bodies. What is this? A taxi ride of manifestation? We are not a transmigrating soul. That was the confusion, but the clarity of ancient times. For them it was clarity. For us now it's confusion. There is no longer an individual. The whole point of society and civilization is that individuals are acting collectively to the point that they will become a collective acting individually. This world's story Okay, all right, guys, before I continue, I wanted to say feel free to engage in the chat section and bring up any ideas or any sort of concepts that people like you think is helpful and relevant to the talk. You know, for me, I wanted to say this, guys. Writing was divine. My hand moved in unknown ways before I could know it, and it fascinated me to a degree that I realized the mind is not present in a single state to have a single story of the world. Really, the mind is we say mind alteration. We say alternative states of consciousness. What does that mean? That means the way the world is stated, or in some sense, the world is appears. That appearance changes in accordance to the main mind of the person changing. So think about it this way: that your vehicle starts in an abstract position, but its abstraction relates to a sort of firmness and solidity of an objective realm. So pretty much all human beings ever, whether you call it philosophy or not, or you give it any name, is we are studying, and we are pretty much studying a sort of triangular relationship. Let me tell you what this relationship is. This relationship has to do with the objective realm, with the subjective realm, and the realm of the witness. I don't try to speak about the realm of the witness because it cannot be spoken about. If it is spoken about, it will in some sense reflect the truth. I call this the rage of a lifetime, or the roar of a lifetime. It's this idea that a human being is at first a consumer. You can do nothing about this. You are designed to consume, you are designed to take in the environment. It's just that after a certain range of accumulation of sensory perception, it's as if your mind is not just here to collect data, it's also here to process the data. So our intelligence is processing data consciously, you can say, and unconsciously, and let's bring in the word subconscious just to make the audiences of the world happier. So in some sense, there's a conscious self living. There is a subconscious self. Just entertain this idea, guys, just for a moment. There's a conscious self living. There's a subconscious self living. And there's an unconscious self living. The conscious self cannot see the unconscious, but it can see how it is connected to the subconscious, or how the subconscious influences it. Do you know? When I say subconscious, guys, make sure you see the dash. Make sure you see the dash between sub and consciousness. The roar of a lifetime occurs when you realize nobody in this world can see from the eyes of another it with the same intensity. Like, I don't know how to tell you guys, but it's like, I call it the great deception. And I've talked to many people on this planet who've experienced this, but some of them have their resolutions were, I find, inefficient. How would I say this? This is going to be a weird metaphor, guys, but the lion's roar is just like how the snake sheds its skin. Now, the snake is this animal has to shed its skin, or in some sense, it will die. It will die if it will remain in the past. And in yoga, they have this idea of the serpent going up, this energetic serpent, conscious rhythm of, kind of oscillating energy in the spine, kind of going to the forehead. Now, I'll say the honest thing, I haven't attained a sort of, I haven't done yoga in the sense of like Kundalini yoga because it felt too artificial to me. So, but I have experienced energetic movement in the body, and I have even experienced how a sort of energetic movement can have an influence in the subjective realm. The most hilarious example and simplest example I could say is in my mind, I can envision my worst self, and then as my hand just punches the air, in my subjective realm, I can see that self break. So that's what I mean by that. I notice that my subjective realm is a room. And so eventually what it is rather than constantly trying to bring the realms of the mind, the subjective realm into the objective, we have to realize that you keep the objective stable and then you utilize your subjective realm. So think of it this way. How many objects throughout the day do you observe? Now, if you have an answer for that, that's great. But if I ask you how many subjects throughout the day you observe, you'll see to kind of linearize that would be very different. Excuse me. Something a lot of people I find don't consider is that it's not just people that communicate to the personhood in the moment, but it is also the world that communicates to you. Let me tell you, I'm responding to the chat section here, guys. Andrew Hunt, welcome to the chat, man. Let me tell you this. We have to give it. Years ago, I went and saw, let me tell you what the mystical advice is. The mystical advice is I'm saying this very politely, but you cannot speak about it. So very early on, I realized the roots of the human intelligence are non-dual. They are non-conceptual and they are unspeakable. So this is why I've created the term the language threshold. I'm sorry, Andrew Hunt, but I gotta tell you, man, I'm not Alan Watts. I am not here to save any world. I am not here to do anything. To be honest, I have confronted the void, and that's why I'm comfortable to speak. I am speaking because even though ancient traditions said, keep your mouth shut, do not speak of the other. But let me tell you why. Because I realized what they hadn't realized. That it is the beautiful opportunity to create design in emptiness. That is life. It is not to just search for the next instruction. That's when your mind is still your commander. Your mind has not become a servant. Your mind must become a servant. Now let me tell you what that means. There's this saying, they say you must serve before you command. Have you heard this? I think, I don't know, some people might have. It's a military, kind of generals knew this. Generals back in the day when the soldier was not content, the soldier would come to the general and say, I can't do this or da-da-da-da-da or something, the honest soldier. And the general would in some sense say, you must serve before you can command. You must rise from the bottom of that dimension to be able to comprehend all its dimensions when you reach the top. So you must serve before you command. At the same time, the ancients also said the mind is a lousy is a lousy master, but a great servant. So I'm like, what is this? We got to serve the mind in order to be commanded, but at the same time, the mind is a lousy master. And I realized eventually that what it is observance. To be honest, the purest observance of the vision in the moment, it can't be touched. You see, that's the cool thing about existence. We cannot measure. We cannot go to somebody. A person cannot go to another person and be like, "Oh my God, I exist more than you." like the person. We can't tease each other on existing more. We all have an existential value, and it's simply how there is an appearance in the void that is us. So I do understand. Of course, it is very important that you find moments throughout the day where you let the ripples on the pond settle. I agree with you there, Andrew. But I'm telling you that how long can we dwell on the illusion? For how long can man see falsity? I feel it's as if there is no agenda. It's too multidimensional and too unknown. It's too. This world is this plane of existence is too multidimensional and too unknown to have a written purpose. The greatest objective purpose is that you're the most evolved update of your genetical pattern, of your genetical line. And so you as a human being must experience your humanhood. So go and live. So if a person just they experience their body, even if they have their subjective realm is really dormant, that's enough of an objective purpose. But the thing is, we have an opportunity that our ancestors didn't, and this is why I cannot revert 100% to ancient ways. Because I understand that every generation responds to their world. If we want to speak about silence, let me tell you guys an incredible story. This is a story that, for me, it has a divine significance. I don't know for the viewers, but I'm going to share it. It's a story about a man named Shri Ramana Maharshi. Shri Ramana Maharshi, some people said he is the incarnation of silence. This man was very quiet, and you can say his name can go in the Guinness World Records as the most influential person with the most quiet. It's like the guy said the least and was heard the most. Shri Ramana Maharshi has a story. First of all, there's a quote he says, just if you take in this quote, you'll understand the mystical vision. Let what comes come, let what goes go, see what remains. That's what Shri Ramana Maharshi says. Now, the story that I'm telling you about is a story that Papaji, a disciple of Shri Ramana Maharshi, is telling about Shri Ramana Maharshi. And the story goes that Shri Ramana Maharshi, this incredibly liberated, silent figure, simple man, if you notice, guys, any person who wants to attain purity, just make your life incredibly simple. Contentment comes with a reality where the person can simply handle the moment. Shri Ramana Maharshi decides to he's usually he has a sort of entourage with him usually, but he just gets this feeling that he should walk alone to another town. And it's like in midday, and he's walking and he gets to a tree. He just feels really pleasant, and he's like, I'm going to sleep beside this tree. The yogic trust of the world eventually reaches a level of peace where it doesn't matter where you exist in the world, the existence is content. So Shri Ramana Maharshi just chooses to sleep beside this tree, and this tree, it had no, its leaves, the tree was dry. So he chooses to lean against the tree and just in some sense, a leafless tree, and just he sleeps. Now the story gets so incredible, guys. The story gets that Shri Ramana Maharshi suddenly opens his eyes, and it's as if his eyes are seeing the branch above him, and he sees that the branch above him has suddenly blossoms. Then he looks in front of him and sees there's 6 to 7 people standing in front of him. 6 to 7 random people. And from these people comes a voice, that the voice says we are the gods of the different Brahma lokas, and we were so fascinated of how silent your mind is. They're saying to Sri Ramana Maharshi, as if the gods of the Brahma lokas have looked at man and they have just seen a noisy confusion for eons. And they came down to Sri Ramana Maharshi and they said, as if you have a silence that amazes the gods. You have a silence where those gods enjoying their offerings cannot understand. And so Sri Ramana Maharshi acknowledges this and returns. And it's a suggestion that in this life, there are levels of incredible silence that will open up your eyes. The eyes of your subjective realm will open up in the more still and silent you are. Just try it out, guys. Like I say, at most, because we want to make this practical universally, pretty much a human being throughout the day, find 10 minutes, 10, 20 minutes max, let's say. But let's say 10 minutes. 20 minutes is ideal, but 10 minutes is okay. And in 10 minutes, the person just sits, just throughout your day. Just go somewhere, sit by a park, somewhere. Just sit. Sit somewhere and do nothing for 10 minutes. Be nothing, do nothing. Forget the subjective realm and just watch the objective realm. There comes such a subtleness that I don't know how to tell you. It's like the mind is definitely like a pond. And as the poet Rumi says, let the waters settle and you shall see the moon and the stars mirrored in your being. As you find a sort of contentment with the objective realm, only then the subjective realm can be valuably explored. There's exploration, there's value in the exploration of the subjective realm. If you are trying to escape objective reality through metaphysics, that becomes something where it's like you can lie to others, but you cannot lie to yourself. That means the reason we have emotions is because the decision making of the human being is not meant to just be decided upon a sort of rational perspective. Rationality is important. It's a pillar of civilization, but the issue is irrationality is also a pillar of civilization. You see, every speaker evokes a world. And in order to speak about movements in that world, there must be a character. And so, guys, you need to be conscious that you're listening to this Mr. Within gift channel. And I have a sort of unique kind of my own archetypes I acknowledge. I see all human beings as advanced communicators or pilots of consciousness. I've spoken about a third as the sadhu, but I'm not going to talk about this here. Just think of it as if every human being you see is either an advanced communicator or a pilot of consciousness. Now, let me tell you the difference between these two types of beings. The advanced communicator is consciously navigating in the unknown. Or let me say it like this. The advanced communicator is the human being. Okay, here. Imagine an airplane ride. Now I want you to imagine the hostesses, the stewards of the plane, are the advanced communicators, the stewards of the plane of existence, but the pilot of the plane of existence is not the steward. So the advanced communicators are human beings on this planet that they realize in some sense that they are the advanced communication of the universal sector experientially. The pilots of consciousness are different. These are very special human beings who they navigate as a collective being in an individual experience. So actually what happens is their experiencer, they experience themselves as individuals, but from the eyes of a collective. The advanced communicator is more experiencing itself as an individual looking at the eyes of the collective, because it has to do with the percentage of your reality and it has to do with how much you trust a certain percentage of the unknown. Usually, let's say it's 50-50. The rational man is at 50-50. 50% things are unknown, 50% things are known. This is why so many people cop out in deep philosophical debates as agnostics. They're like, okay, I don't know, you know? And saying you're an agnostic is another way of saying, in some sense, yeah, you don't know. However, I find that we have to ask ourselves, isn't evolution all about being introduced to new dimensions of activity? So we have to think now as a species, 8 billion of us, that we have to wonder where language and the biological apparatus are evolving to, how they're evolving. I find that this is the most important thing, just to be aware of your subjective realm. For example, I'm going to give you an example. A person A and person B, all right, they meet in the park. Now, person A says something to person B gets upset. When person B gets upset, person A can notice how there is turbulence in the subjective realm of person B. Now, person A can keep on choosing to declare the reality, to solidify the moment in a certain way, or can give a certain flexibility. You see, it's kind of like the three states of a substance: solid, liquid, gas. So in communication, you can speak with solid realities. An angry person is a solid communicator. What does that mean? I don't mean solid with a good connotation. I mean solid in the person that the angry person just thinks he's right, just thinks what he sees is the only world to extract justification of action from. All right. So you become a solid being when there is, in some sense, an ignorance of the other world. What does that mean? That means what you see, you think that's the only thing, that's it. You know, when any person, selfish people get angry probably in a time span of 3 minutes if their reality is challenged. Now check this out. The liquid state of communication, what is that like? We can totally imagine a person just being fixed in their world. It's like, no, the world is like this. I disagree with everything else. Like that's like a person being in one box, in one room. Now a person who realizes they're in a room of a house, of a mansion. They're in one room. What they see to be reality is one room in a vaster system. So whenever that comes, this is why it's like humility is always a mystical virtue. Oh man, I'm speaking too fast. I need some air, guys. A liquid state of communication is freedom. That means either in the moment you're giving freedom, either you're not giving freedom, or you're taking freedom. The best thing to do in life is, like chess, let it make the first move. Let it make the first. This is a strategy in any sort of, I guess, competitive domain, that one side lets the other person observes first, doesn't make the first move. That ability to make the first move, not make the first move, is a suggestion of observance. You see, every action can be said to be inspired with a story or inspired with a hidden story. And you can say emotions are when various memories are being intersected. So the moment let me just finish the example I was saying. The liquid state, freedom in communication. more freedom. That means it's like, because you're saying, the person saying, all right, I'm seeing a world, but this world could potentially not be the only thing that's here, the only system of value. So I for a second just acknowledge what I've seen, and then I observe reality. And if there is a potential for another system of value, that means my current system of value can be restructured, redesigned, right? So the most ultimate state, where I think eventually it comes from those person A and person B just silently sitting in front of the presence of each other. A state of mind like gas is a state that starts from freedom and then wonders about everything else. You see, ladies and gentlemen, every day you wake up, you have a choice of who is standing in your eyes. You can choose to see life to be incredibly multidimensional. I think love requires life to be multidimensional. Any human being drawn to some sort of emotional existence, which is the purpose of love, I find. Without love, it's as if there's an emotional gap in the intelligence. But the thing is that it makes me kind of feel sad to be the first person to say it. But our species has to confront the transference of conscious activity into immaterial fields of intelligence, which are inner rhythms. The unthinkable. We are evolving into fields of intelligence. The particle is evolving into the field of intelligence. We have to enjoy our individual existence. We have to at a speed unimaginable. The civilization must organize its values to treat 8 billion people as tourists in an unknown world. And so what does that mean? When you see a tourist just cares for one thing: how the experience of the vacation was. And so really think about how many human beings in this life, or even currently as I speak, they are in states of inefficiency where they're like, there's so many resources in the world, but why is the world still like this? The world has forgotten itself. Humanity has lost its great story. And as Terence McKenna incredibly said, the poets have failed us. I felt offended by that quote, guys. He said the poets have failed us. What he meant is that the logos is active for the whole species, but the ethos of the species is, there's a language war. There's a war of ideology. Ideologies are like titans set loose, and you can say if an example of a collective being is a bunch of people following one idea. What that means is that idea is real to imagine 100 people. So those 100 people who have this are in the same room of thought, they in some sense have no choice but to walk together. So eventually they will be seen as a collective being. Man's mind has a freedom unimaginable. The pen in the hand of a conscious universe is the opportunity to realize that every moment is an expression of intelligence. It's as if, guess what? Many people who are waiting for success, if your success is not simultaneously happening now, If you can't see your success here, you'll never see it here. Like the mule that kind of was, a stick was attached to the mule's back and a carrot was hanging from the stick, you know, like a rope connected to a carrot, connected to the stick. And this mule, this donkey is endlessly like, all right, the carrot, I'm gonna get it now. I'm gonna get the carrot now. I'm gonna get the carrot now. Until the donkey realizes that it has to put its heaven down. Literally, the donkey has to lie down on the ground. Then the carrot falls on the ground. Then it can just, in an awkward way, go lean closer towards it and eat the carrot. That's how the donkey gets the carrot. So if a human being, we take the same silly, hilarious metaphor, that if you are seeking for a heaven, you have to stop the inefficient act in order to even give the efficiency a chance. The inefficiency can only be concluded from your vision if you're considering your own intelligence. That means really we have our own eyes to work with. The ethos was the collective inspiration. The collective inspiration for creatures that language is our most sophisticated inner technology is going to be a story. That means the world is telling itself an inefficient story and it's having inefficient results. Children of the future generations, they're not opening their eyes in a world where they're honored by. Most people are dishonored by the world they live in. This is why we are selfish by nature. Because the world does not see behind our eyes. And when the person understands this, they will stop judging existence. That means I wondered, regardless of what kind of sophisticated Machiavellian, thought structure you may have, but the thing is that the story of life is generated. It needs power. The power of the stories that dictate a person's life is emerging now. This is why the here and now was a holy shit moment for the New Age community. All those people who were living their lives and they felt there was a sort of hollowness in their life. There's like, okay, is this just a solo walk? Are we all like models walking on stage? Completely solo. The world sees a tip of the iceberg, but the vast majority of the iceberg is unknown. I realize now in 2020 the species has a language technology sophisticated enough to communicate its inner realm. That means the purpose of the human being is no longer just physical stuff, it is also inner. It is also to communicate the inner realms. That is going to be the renaissance. The next renaissance that Mr. Within feels is going to happen. It's like, I call it the multidimensional renaissance. The multidimensional renaissance is this idea. Pretty much I saw it in a vision. Okay, so first I got to explain to you, like, take this image of how old, like a renaissance, let's say the Italian Renaissance, the European Renaissance, that it occurred when enough people were doing new things in a community, in a system, that suddenly made others, they set up the bar high. When you set up the bar high, something strange happens. People are born that will set the bar higher. This multidimensional renaissance is pretty much the only option I find humanity is left with. We have to share the inner realms. We have to start studying imagination as intensely as reality and start having a relationship with the unknown factors of the cosmos that can be in personal access. This doesn't mean making the world into a divine agency and worshiping it and not using your mind throughout the day. It means that fundamentally realizing you're a creature of attention, so stop letting language enslave you in certain emotions, looped emotions. I'll share with you guys a personal story, something that happened to me. I was in Italy, in Cislago. I was in a hotel in Cislago. And when I was in, I went to this hotel, and the hotel had 4 floors, and so I had a room on the third floor, and I would smoke cigarettes at the time. I mean, I still do, but but I would smoke, and so I there was no balcony, but there was enough of a like. They had made enough of a kind of extension from the edge of the window for flower pots or something. So I went there at night. It was like, I think like 3 a.m. When I got to the hotel, and I just got there, and I was outside. I remember I walked outside the window. It was kind of dangerous. It was a bit careless what I was doing, but I was in such a low state of mind. I had fallen into a stress loop, into a depression loop, LOOP loop, you know. And so what happened is my psychology was just freely reducing my self-worth to myself. That means my awareness was breaking myself in that moment. It was a dark night of the soul. And I remember I went in, I was smoking there, and I had headphones on, and I remember just like, because I've reached a certain point where, I mean, I can observe my subjective realm. So I was there, and this was an experience where, how in that moment of the dark night of the soul, I could not observe the subjective realm, but I'm going to tell you what happened. So I'm there, like literally a couple inches from my feet, there's the edge of like the building, and I'm seeing the street downstairs, and I'm just thinking to myself, my sense of self-worth had reduced. Just internally, I was reducing my sense of self-worth to a point where it's as if my failures were in front of my eyes before my success, right? And so in that moment, I remember I got even a thought that I'm like, oh, even if I like jump, you know, it was a very hard time, guys, but I'll tell you, I thought even if I jump, if what is the chance that it's like I'm an eternal being, and then the same game continues. So I remember I was there, and suddenly the intenseness of this sort of this kind of cruel dialogue in my mind amplified, right? And as I was sitting there, it was as if I felt, I'll be honest, I felt shittier and shittier, and I felt like at a low state where I felt literally I was vanishing. It was a sort of fear of the evaporation of self from the world it's in. I felt I was internally dying. So, anyways, in that moment, something happened that snapped me out of it, and I'll tell you guys, it was fascinating. One of the most important things I think I've kind of like extracted out of the psychology of man. In that moment, guys, I remember I was thinking of sentences, like sentences were rising in my mind that was cursing. It was as if I was becoming rude to myself behind my eyes, you know? And I suddenly said something, that dialogue in my head suddenly repeated a sentence. The moment it repeated a sentence, I got bored of the stress. I literally snapped out of that, and I was watching the depression happen in my mind. I was no longer there. I snapped out of that subjective framework. Then I realized how sophisticated and fascinating our minds are, that they keep creating rooms that we are in. And we can take these rooms seriously, or we can observe them. The pilots of consciousness navigate as their whole plane of existence. They are beings that have noticed that, all right, even though there's a physical body that has to move and live and exist, you know, beyond itself, there's also a mind. There's also a space where ideas instantly emerge. It's as if, I say this, I've said this in other talks, your attention is the god of your thought. You don't understand how magnificent the human attention is. The communication of the inner realms, the freedom to be free. That means the way, guys, honesty, I had it as a value was not because of some religious ethics, was because what has dared make me dishonest? What has dared live as me in my mind? So you see, that's when the pure attention is found. Your pure attention is Satchit Ananda, as they say in yoga. Satchit Ananda means conscious existence is bliss. The awareness of the light brings forth the brilliance of when it will go out. That means the reason the human being should attempt greatness is because what that last moment you're in this material plane of existence before you transition is going to be a moment where you're like, world, I showed you my greatest effort. Now what will you do? And then the being takes his last breath and it's like, ah, you know, it becomes, you know, Ananda Chit Sat. You become, your mind honors your body and frees it. Your mind, which is in some sense, on some level, playfully I'm saying this, is a collective being, feels you know what you're doing. The archetype, it's like the archetype handler. That's what the will is. It handles archetypes. It brings them forth, it dismantles them, it can instantly redesign them, change them, shift them. The ability of the mind to find the new only through emptiness. Emptiness becomes like a shield of the mind. And then infinity and the fullness of manifestation becomes the sword. And so as the known and the unknown occurs, the pilot navigates, realizing the plane of existence has two wings. Has chaos and order administering it. So it's pretty much attention navigating through chaotic phenomenology, ordered phenomenology. When the phenomenology is more ordered, it's easier to be a self. When the room is more chaotic, it's harder to be a self. The same idea can be said as if, imagine the ground you're standing on was changing all the time. Imagine the ground was a rug being pulled up from under your feet all the time. So before you could even know your balance, the world is changing. Vision. Vision is the most important word. You know, many people said that there was a gate to paradise, but few people have said that that gate to paradise is vision. The gate of paradise is your eyes. I gotta share a story here, guys. A story that comes to us from the Sufi dervish tradition. These three dervish friends find themselves at the edge of a town. They see this giant wall. This giant wall that has never existed before. That like it wasn't there yesterday. So these three friends are like, this is strange. All right, we never noticed a giant wall here. And so as they're walking by the wall, one of them suddenly sees a ladder. Sees a ladder that's going up like to the top, this really long ladder. And one of that friend looks around to the other two friends like, guys, I'm going up. You know, time to see what this wall's hiding. The guy goes up, the two friends hold the ladder to make sure it's stable or whatever. The first guy gets to the top of the wall. He fully stands there and takes a good look at what's on the other side. Without a word, he just instantly jumps in. Doesn't say anything. He jumps in. The two friends see this and they're like, whoa, did that guy just jump? It's like, that's a pretty long jump, you know? The second guy's like, I'm going up. And take into consideration, guys, the first person who went had two people holding the ladder. The second person who went up has one person holding the ladder. That means still enough stability. So the second person goes up. The second friend's like, whoa, what is this? Like, he goes up. The second friend goes up and reaches there and suddenly sees what the first friend had seen and says something similar to the first friend. He says, oh my God, what he sees is the garden of paradise. He sees heaven. He sees a heavenly dimension. So what that means is the first person came and saw on the other side of this wall is heaven, so he jumped in. The second person now has gone up and he's like, oh my God, it's the garden of paradise. And suddenly, right before he jumps in, his conscience makes him act. And his conscience makes him act, and he's like, all right, I got to tell the guy, our third friend, what's going on here. And he looks down, and he says to the third friend, yo, bro, the Garden of Paradise is up here. You know, I'm jumping in. You know, Timmy jumped in too. You know, Timmy, you know, Sufi dervish named Tim. Anyways, guys, the second friend, he says, I gotta tell the third friend. And he looks down and he says, the Garden of Paradise is up here. I'm jumping in, you know? And he jumps in. And we have the third friend kind of standing by this long ladder, realizing that he has to go up the hardest journey, the one that requires the most trust, because there's no one holding the ladder, you know? And so he climbs this ladder, trusting the moment, the third friend. He gets up there, and just like the other two, says, oh my God, the Garden of Paradise is here, heaven is right here in front of my eyes. In that moment, he's about to jump, and then even his conscience, you can say, or his will, his free will tells him, there it is. That's the finish line. Jump into the finish line. Every part of this guy's being is telling him, jump, go into heaven. And right before he jumps, his feet is in the air, his feet comes down, and he says, the Garden of Paradise is here. The whole world should know. And he comes down the ladder. And the idea was that we are either taking responsibility in this world as an individual being or as a collective being. The evolution of individualism is collectivism. I don't know. It's like the other side of the spectrum. It goes that way automatically. So anyways, guys, in that story, there was a very profound thing that, trust me, if you want heaven, you can find it. There's many heavenly dimensions. They're evoked, by the way. So you can say, just like how a state of mind is set, we say a person has a mindset. Well, guess what? You can set your mind in many ways. You can set your mind in ways where earth is actually built in paradise. You can set your mind in a way where paradise is built on earth. It's all man-made. So you see, the mind can move in different ways. Now the species needs to have an awareness to its subjectivity, and I think writing this shouldn't become a lost art. That means I wondered, there's many banners a person can hold in this world, and I'm trying to kind of keep the beacon of what the great designers and what the great designers saw. There's so many great designers in this world, they're kind of like prophetic figures in my mind. Inventors are prophetic to me, you know? Not any inventor. Inventors that, in some sense, without them, the world would have less meaning. There's this, there's this kind of story, you know. So this story, there's a shoemaker, and he's kind of making his shoes, and his son is there, and his young son is helping his father, who's a shoemaker, you know, this poor shoemaker. Okay, and the father one day, he's like, as his son is helping him, he's saying, son, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the son looks at his shoemaker father, and he's like, I don't want to hurt my father's emotions, you know. And the son says, I want to be just like you, Dad. Then the shoemaker throws the shoe on the ground and starts hitting his own head like, oh my God, oh my God. And the son's like, Dad, what is it, Dad? You know, and then the shoemaker says, son, I wanted to be a king and I became a shoemaker. You want to be a shoemaker, you'll be nothing. You'll be non-existence, you know? And so it's this is a playful story, guys. It's kind of like this, you know, borderline of a joke. But the idea is that really vision is crucial. Vision it's being started consciously. Most people feel it's unconscious, but it can become originated consciously. That means if I tell you, imagine like a kind of golden apple in the sky beaming. So it's like, yes, you can imagine, right? But it's like certain things. How can I tell you? It's like creating a new view. Yeah, that Ivan, I'm responding to the chat section right now. Ivan, you're right. Shoot for the moon and you land in the stars. Exactly, but that shooting for the moon means kind of like how Osho would say the state of mind is conditioned its whole life to think it's going from imperfection to perfection, but eventually it shifts into going from perfection to perfection. So instead of having the dynamic of lesser potential and higher potential, have higher potential and higher than that potential. Entertain your mind. You know, I'm not saying like walk blindly like a king of your inner reality, but I'm saying like when you see something in its natural way, you will also know how to naturally handle it. Sometimes the issue of a person not being able to find the answer is because they are too convinced that this problem can be only seen in one angle. There's something about the free will, guys. I don't know how to say it, that it's just too special to have followers. It's too special to worship. You know, it's like there's a motorcycle. Imagine a bunch of people worshiping a motorcycle, and one person is like, just ride the motorcycle. Just ride the motorcycle. Realize that life is you can choose to have the subjective realm in the steering wheel or the objective realm in the steering wheel. Too much silence can make you just be the observer of every moment. And that's fine, but it's not, it's a very possible state. It's a healthy state too for the mind to be an observer, observing phenomena, to be the observer of the moment. But we have to use these hands. We have to use the biological opportunity of the evolutionary biological opportunity. And so the best way we can is just now growing the linguistic realm. So this kind of crucial discovery of language, people living inside language, guess what? We got to break the old houses and build new ones. We got to break the old stories and build new ones. Now we can choose to completely forget the past or allow the past to remain, just build a new dimension. As if the way we're going to bring world peace is not by having the world change. The world can't change. It's too old to change. Okay? So because the world is too old to change, the future has to have just new space. This earth is big enough for another civilization to start developing. We have one civilization based on the ancient path, a new civilization emerging based on a new direction, with new axiomatic perceptions on how the universe is a moment of occurrence. So that new civilization will eventually become a yin-yang symbol. So instead of destroying the past, we give it an opportunity to change by saying, if you ever wanted to, this new civilization is here. What I mean by civilization, of course, guys, is ultimately all effects of social activity throughout the planet. It doesn't matter if it's a group of friends. It doesn't matter if it's a nation of people. It doesn't matter if it's all the nations of people. You know? There is we cannot just get defined by language. We pilot through the linguistic simulation, usually through an evocational method, simply because we're like a battery. Like every day is like the light of the candle is lit, then the candle finishes, and the next day is like a new candle, new candle, new candle, right? Now, to say some things about writing. I started writing when to be honest, through internal visions, I saw certain subjective phenomena that took my attention, and it's as if the activities of the world, I had an external desire in my youth. Because I had an external desire, I had totally thrown out the idea that potentially life doesn't want me to pay only attention to to outer phenomena. Maybe it wants me to pay attention to inner phenomena. So I suddenly realized that the more I paid attention to inner phenomena, the more the reality opened up. The more I was paying attention to outer phenomena, the more it was as if like I was fishing for something. I remember some profound experiences I've had has been through doing yard work. And I remember it was 2013. I was raking leaves from the side of my house, and it was kind of midday, but in Canada it wasn't like too warm. Like the sun was out, but anyways. So as I'm raking these leaves, suddenly for the first time I begin in my mind noticing language arising that I had never heard. And the language was so beautiful that I noticed I'm raking leaves and there's tears in my eyes, but there was no emotion. Can you imagine like getting tears but not having an emotion? When I say not having an emotion, it wasn't like a like it wasn't like a crying kind of tear. It was like an emotionless tear, but the emotion was a fascination. It's like the fascination. Well, you'll notice because guys, there's two types of crying. There's one where your nose kind of clogs up a little bit, you know, the sound of the nasal passage is heard, and then there's a type of crying where there's literally just tears formed on your eyes. Think of as if onions, like when like the aroma of an onion hits your face, you're like Jesus, you know, your eyes crying for the death of that onion. That's why people cry when there's onions around, guys. Too much. I had tears of fascination of hearing a sentence, and I remember it was like, I don't remember it fully, but it was like to enter the temple of compassion, something something. It was for the first time I had a sort of rhythmic language open up to my mind, and it just went into this incredible kind of I don't know how to say it, guys. It was I think it was earlier than 2013. Maybe beginning of 2012 that experience happened. I don't know. I don't know. But it like the experience was very profound, guys. It was my subjective realm was alive, and I somehow became aware of it. When I became aware of it, I became free from thought, so I dwelled as a moment of observance my whole life attributelessly. When I was younger, I even felt I wasn't even in the body. That means I not that I'm like like a ghost is hovering in the air, just the fact that I was just the pure moment. It's like the mind was being the subjective world before even being a subjective self. We need kind of like it's fascinating, guys. It's the child is born from a temperature kind of biological response to the environment. It begins to have this snowball of emotional dualism develop in the psychology. From that emotional dualism, there eventually comes self and other, you know, in the same way that it's like first there is self and world, then there comes self and then a sense of other from that sense of other world. Okay, let me see how I can simplify this. Well, first thing is the subjective realm due to the evocational nature of language. I mean, behind your eyes, phenomena can become like an empty piece of paper where thoughts are being written in the moment, or they arise through a sort of crystallization of intention ultimately from an attention. Your attention is divine because there's no reason, no logical reason for it to be here. When I say logical reason, that means imagine somebody throwing a sphere in outer space, and they tell the guy, "Why did you throw the sphere?" And the guy says, "I don't know. I just felt like throwing it." And so this sphere is endlessly hovering in space, and its reasoning cannot even be found by what's in it. So I thought, like, if the human being made a circle, a giant sphere hovering due to magnetic technology or something in the air, and this sphere had a bunch of ants on it, 8 billion ants on it. So on this sphere, what would those ants do? How would they emerge as a sort of society and civilization? All right, guys, thanks for listening. I'm going to end off with a quote from Buckminster Fuller. And he says the most, I think it's an important quote to know. He says, "Don't fight forces, use them." Mr. Within would say the same goes with the inner realm. Without trust, no great structure could have been built. Without trust, no invention could have been landed on this material plane. The pen in the hand of a conscious universe is a moment of sight in the void that can realign, redesign all the phenomenology in every moment in any way. There is a strange freedom, just like a child can learn an instrument easily. Similarly, the mind of man in any moment can have a sort of entrance into a new room, into a new way of seeing things. And the most hardest thing to see is the seer. And in the Upanishads, they said the seer of thought is the seer of sight is unseen. So ultimately, all studying of the self will lead to how awareness is just being here. The contentment and true experience of that awareness, it's like before the word liberation exists, the Pure Lands were accessed. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And pick up the pen only when the commands of the inner realm are too strong to ignore. Yeah. Much blessings and namaste, guys. Thanks for tuning in.